Frank, you told me you're saying a little bit about yourself,
Okay.
and so I would just hand over to you, and thanks a lot, and we're looking forward for your talk.
Thank you. Well, I would be nervous if it was the very first time I've been on this stage, but it's actually the second time. The first time I actually had the whole crowd singing, and I won't do that this time, but we had a hackathon here earlier this year. And unfortunately, my hackathon team ended up blowing up a lot of circuit boards. So I had the whole audience singing up to the tune of Smoke on the Water, singing Smoke on the Breadboard. So on this stage, so I'm pretty comfortable here. So I've been in Vorarlberg for about 8 months. And like Thomas said, I'm here because of the technology. When I first came to Vorarlberg about 1.5 years ago, I was like, well, there's a lot of cows and farms here. A lot of cheese, a lot of beer. But then I started digging into the covers a little bit and seeing what else is happening here in Vorarlberg. And it was really interesting to find so many cool technology companies, so many interesting people interested in just talking about technology. And when I went back to Seattle, I said, look, I worked for a consulting company called Slalom, and I was like, look, you people have to get into this area. It's like Silicon Valley over there. Everybody's really excited and energetic. And they were like, what, Austria? So I quit my job and moved here. So I work at Inet Logistics here in Dornbirn as a data architect, and I consider myself a blockchain evangelist. I also just put my IBM champion thing on there because I just won that award again this year. I was an IBM champion in 2014 for streaming data technology, and this year for blockchain, so I'm pretty excited about that. Doesn't mean I work for IBM though, so don't feel like I'm biased. And there's my email in there. So, blockchain. Everyone is new to blockchain. If someone tells you they're an expert in blockchain, they're probably lying. Or they're trying to sell you an ICO or something. But what's interesting to me is that trying to put a pin in the map of blockchain, where it is right now, what is happening right now with blockchain, is notoriously hard. And it's not just hard because of it's new, it's because there's so much stuff happening in it right now. If I have a tutorial for something, for example, to do with blockchain, I'm trying to learn how to do something new in it. If I'm not using the absolute most latest and greatest compilers, the latest and greatest libraries, stuff blows up all the time. You have to be very patient with it right now. So a lot of it is very new. But also, I love this quote from Sarah Baker Mills at IBM that the visual language is still being codified. That means the diagrams that I use to show you, to illustrate concepts, the way we talk about blockchain, the metaphors that we use, the analogies that I use to describe things are also still being developed. And that's really exciting to me because I really like talking, as you'll see, and I like talking in metaphors sometimes. I always give this little caveat that I was not a science or a computer person in school. I was an English literature major, so I speak a lot about metaphors and things. But it's a very new language, this whole world of blockchain. And when I say everything is new to blockchain, my coworker Thomas said, yeah, but you said that a couple months ago too. So who here has no idea what blockchain is? So everyone in this room has heard something about blockchain. Oh, there's someone in the back there who has no idea what it is. Great. So when I first started describing to people, I found that I would either get very technical or just kind of woo-woo about it, as I would say, not really able to describe it to them in a way that was tangible. But then I came up with this great idea. In Europe, or I'll say in Austria or Germany, when you were growing up, you had a savings account maybe, and you had this thing called, I'll pronounce it correctly, a Sparbuch, that you would go to the bank and you would take money in to them and give it to them, and they would accept it, and they would write down in your little Sparbuch how much you had, and you would get it back, and you'd go home and think, oh, I got €5, yay. So I like to describe some of the underpinnings of blockchain as a magic Sparbuch. That is, it is a ledger of information, It's cryptographically signed. That means it's secure. It's irrevocable. Once something was in your Sparbook from the bank, could you get rid of it? Could you erase it? Well, you could, but why would you, right? You could change the numbers in, but when you go into the bank, they're going to know you did it anyways. But what's magic about this Sparbook with regards to blockchain? What's magic about the Sparbook of blockchain is that everybody has the same one. Everybody has one of these magic Sparbooks that have the same transactions in them. And I'm not going to get too much into just cryptocurrencies tonight, that's sort of the exchange of money with it, because there's an underlying technology of this Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies called blockchain, which to me is much more interesting as a technology person and as a data person. And I'm going to introduce you to some concepts. I'm going to show you some quotes, some funny jokes on the screen, and then we're going to get into some ideas about what you can do with blockchain today and what is being done with it today. And hopefully we can have some conversations around what would be interesting just as totally crazy ideas around it. And then what to do with those crazy ideas too. Do you guys get Dilbert here in Austria? I kind of put like, oh yeah, it'd be something you immediately get. There is a lot of hype about blockchain right now. In fact, Gartner Group has what they call a hype cycle. Some of you might have seen that. We're very high on the hype cycle with blockchain. There is an iced tea company in America that changed part of their company name to blockchain. That's all they did. They didn't change their recipe. They didn't change their product. They just put blockchain into their product name, and their stock went up by like 150% in one day. So when I heard that, I immediately went out and registered the domain name Blaukchain, so .at. So another great quote. So Bitcoin is what most people know about blockchain. Now, I didn't see the end results here. Who here has Bitcoins or cryptocurrencies of some sort, right? Who here does not? Of the people that do not have them, do you want them? Just raise your hand if you want them, if it's interesting to you. It's kind of an interesting idea. Come see me afterwards. I'll give you some Bitcoins. Don't worry. Actually, I've given a talk similar to this one at the Mutterschiff, the Digitale Initiativen group over here in Dornbirn, and I always ask, so who here has Bitcoins? And a few people raise their hands, like, who here got those Bitcoins from me? So there's a few people here who have, but not many. But Bitcoin was how this all started. Bitcoin was what was inspiring people to write this technology. But the next generation of it is what's really exciting to me. And I will tell you, I'm old enough to remember before there was a World Wide Web, before there was even an internet. And I remember the first time I saw a browser. It was something called Mosaic. Anybody here remember Mosaic? Okay, you're all over 40, right? And it was beautiful to me because I knew a little bit about hypertext at the time because I was an English major and a lot of the libraries used hypertext to describe documents. But to me, it was sort of this large, tag-based, kind of hard to read sort of thing. But what Eric Berners-Lee did is he took this and wrapped it in a visual interface and said, I can now link to objects, I can link to pictures, I can put this out there and you can see all this stuff visually. And I was like, whoa, holy crap, that's going to change the world. That's the way I feel about blockchain technology today. It's an incredibly simple design pattern. It's an incredibly simple technology to describe non-technically, but what's really powerful about it is all the different things that this technology is going to enable. God, I put a lot of quotes on the screen. I even took some of them out. So when blockchain was first started, people were using it to store value. That is, value of cryptocurrencies, things that had value. And all the technology around it, the miners, the wallets, the brokers, and all that kind of stuff, and all these tools came out, and they came out in support of this idea of exchanging value. But now, this underlying technology is beginning to build use cases that go way beyond just exchanging money. and just reinventing money. So when you exchange something with someone, when you want to do an exchange of something, and we can use money as an example, but it doesn't have to be the only one. Typically, you have something called an intermediary or a broker that validates the transaction for you. We're going to exchange something. I have something you want to pay me for it. We have to have some way of proving that I gave it to you and you remitted me for it. So in today's economic world, we have this idea of brokers. Examples of brokers: credit cards. Right? A credit card is a broker of a transaction. It proves, hey, I'm going to pay this to you, and then you pay it to me, and they take a fee. That fee that they take is really important, right? Because that funds their ability to be a broker. With blockchain, and also the identity management. We'll come back to identity management in some of my later use cases. When you go to a broker, and let's talk about a bigger broker, like a platform broker, like Amazon.com. You want to buy something from Amazon.com. They require a lot of information from you, don't they? And they track a lot of information about you. I was reading this morning about how you can find out what Google knows about you. And there's all these links you can go to that'll show you all these incredible things that Google knows about you. And it's frightening. Never Google yourself. But that's the price you pay for participation in these platform technologies. With blockchain, it's not necessary to do that. It's not necessary to give away all your information to affect a transaction. And I don't want to get too down into the weeds of how the transactions work, because then we get into math, and then I'd have to resort to asking Thomas math questions, and it would get really embarrassing for me. But I want to stick to this idea of use cases. So in blockchain, which is a peer-to-peer network, that is, it's not centralized on one broker, your identity is your own. You don't have to share with people information that you don't want to. Your identity is your key, in essence. And as long as your private key that identifies you is private, your identity is completely your own. So if I want to exchange something with you, I don't have to tell you anything more than my key. Unlike doing a transaction with Amazon, where you got to give them all this information about you, they're tracking information about you via your browser, and you're giving up a lot of your privacy. Also, with blockchain and with the currencies or any of the assets that you have stored on the blockchain, they are also your own. They're not stored in a bank. They're not stored with a credit card company. They're not stored under your mattress like some people do. They're your own. And they're your own to spend and to accumulate on your own. Now, the opposite of this peer-to-peer is a platform. And a platform is something like Amazon, a Facebook, and a platform business has this weird side. I had a graphic for this, and I kind of debated putting it in or not. But if you think about eBay, Amazon, and Facebook, they allow you to create transactions to do things. In order to do that, you give up your information, and then you pay them to do something, and that invokes trust with them. Okay, I kind of assume Amazon's going to send me the stuff, and that trust allows them to get bigger transaction fees, and this cycle continues, it perpetuates itself until you have these huge, huge platforms, and Jeff Bezos is now worth, someone tell me, $150 billion or some crazy number like that. So the other thing about a platform is that everybody is operating in the same sandbox. You don't set up your own Amazon. Amazon is Amazon. They control it all. It's all very centralized. And but the important thing about platforms is that you have to be able to do stuff on it. And one of the criticisms of cryptocurrencies and blockchain in general is, what can I do on it? I can't buy anything. Can I buy a house in Bitcoins? You sure can. I don't know if every place is going to let you, but you're going to see more of that. Can I actually buy dinner with Bitcoins? There are some places where you probably, anybody know any restaurants that take Bitcoin, take crypto payments? Somewhere, maybe in Vienna or Vaduz or someplace, there's someplace that does, I don't know. There's actually Bitcoin ATMs now. There's one here in Dornbirn, and there's one in, I know there's one in Vaduz. The only thing is, the minute you start using an ATM to get money in and out of Bitcoins, exchanging them into cash, what happens? Fees. And what are those fees like? Huge fees, yeah. I worked for a company in Seattle called Coinstar. Anybody ever heard of Coinstar? Coinstar lets you take bags of money, coins, and dump them into a machine, and it goes, and it hands you money, a little slip at the end of it. It says you deposited, all your quarters you've been saving for 20 years, and you get $80. Except we take 10%. Or as time went on, they took 11%. Then they took 12%. And that was their business model, basically, was to get a piece of that transaction. So those are platforms. So how is a blockchain different from that? What are the basics of a blockchain? Well, you can think of a blockchain, it has three components. It has data, that is the content associated with it. It has a network that it runs on, and there's not lots, but there's many different networks that you can run your blockchains on. And it has logic. It has rules by which these transactions happen. And again, this gets a little bit technical, but I wanted to put this in here because I really like this language of object-oriented design. And object-oriented design has been around for a while. If you're a developer, you undoubtedly write in object-oriented languages in 2018. I can't imagine anybody writing one that's not. And the things that we do inside of the blockchain world kind of map pretty well to object-oriented design. And we're going to talk about those when we get into the design patterns in a little bit here. The storage for blockchain is by definition, because everybody has a copy of the transactions, it's decentralized. There's no one database of the blockchain. I actually have the entire Ethereum blockchain, which is a network, on my laptop under that desk. And I'm sure there's people in this room. Who else has a copy of a complete chain on their laptop in this room right now? Maybe not right in this room, but in the next room over, right? If we were to compare ours to each other, they would be identical. It's the magic Sparbook, and we both have it. It also has a concept in it of consensus. And consensus means, in the blockchain world, that we all agree on the order and the veracity, the provenance of the transactions in it. And the math behind this, how this all happens, we can save that for another talk because it's a completely different talk that I probably have someone else give for me. But the idea is anything that goes into this magic Sparbook, all the participants have agreed it's supposed to be there. That's the important thing to remember. And if something tries to go into it that everyone doesn't agree on, what happens? It doesn't go into it. It doesn't go into the magic Sparbook. So it's also immutable. There's no way to delete something from the magic Sparbook of the blockchain and have your transaction record still be legitimate and still be usable. So I've used the word decentralization a couple times, and I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by that, because that is sort of an underlying concept of blockchain. So in the beginning, way back in the dark ages, we had standalone computers and applications. Anybody here have a Radio Shack TRS-80 or a Atari C64? Yeah. These were standalone computers. There was no networking. God, that's craziness. How are you going to plug two computers together, right? And then acoustic couplers. Anybody here ever use acoustic couplers to dial into networks? Now a few more hands raised, And then maybe RS-232 networks. Anybody have those? Yeah, we're getting a few more hands. But then networks came along and computers could talk to each other. So the relationship between two computers is what we call clients and servers. Clients make requests and servers respond to requests. But we had to wait a little while. In the early days, there were competing protocols. There were competing standards for networks. Anybody here become a certified netware administrator at any point in their life? You had to learn a protocol from a vendor practically at that point in technology. So we had to wait a little bit for TCP/IP to take over the world, essentially. And then we had to wait for some cryptography. We had to wait for good cryptography standards to come along. And I have discussions with my coworkers all the time about, is it good enough? I don't know. The math people say, yes, but I could break it if I had a quantum computer and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's good enough. But we also had to increase local storage. When I tell you I have a copy of the entire Ethereum chain on my laptop, what does that tell you about my laptop? I have little bit of storage on there. I have at least a terabyte or so to play around in on there. But computers themselves had to have more local storage in order to enable this to happen, this sort of decentralization idea. And computing power. We had to have enough horsepower on these machines, not like the machine that your father-in-law or someone uses who has 2 gigabytes of RAM and one processor, and he wonders why he can't do videos on it, which literally just happened last weekend. And then you had to have millions of users, everybody sort of participating in this ecosystem. And then what are we going to do? In decentralization, we take away the servers. We say the standalone computers, the standalone mobile phones function as clients and servers in this world. And we can actually do this because there's enough power down on these devices to do it. Now, there's still a place in the world for servers, obviously, mail servers and file servers and all kinds of good stuff. But what's happening is this idea of a central computer that has to respond to all your requests isn't really not necessary to operate in the new world of decentralized applications. So, I debated putting this slide in or not. I'm going to come back to this actually, because this is about design patterns, and this is about the kinds of things that we do as we're developing applications. But just really quickly, as we're talking about all the possible use cases that you could conceive of for blockchain, these are the patterns that I use to say, does it fit for me? Does it actually have the things that I need to do? And there's really 3 categories of these solutions as they relate to this isn't just a blockchain concept. This is sort of a software development concept in general. But I need to be able to create things. I need to be able to create objects, code, whatever. These things need to have structure. They need to be able to be organized. Say something may be a tree structure. Well, I need some way of facilitating, creating, and managing a tree structure. And they need to do stuff. They need to have behavior. I may need to, for example, look across a list of objects and do something to all of them. And that's a design pattern. And so these are the kinds of things that I look at when I'm evaluating applications, when I'm evaluating ideas, including blockchain ones. It's a little bit nerdy, but... so visually speaking, what did I just walk through? I talked about centralized applications. What does it say? Station and link on it. I don't even know where I got this. So this is the world of client server, right? You have all these clients on the outside. Oh, I have a pointer on here somewhere, don't I? Right. Oh, look at that. If you were cats, you could run around on the floor. So in the middle, you have your server. On the outside, you have your clients, everybody talking into it. And the difference here is you have decentralized, where these clients and servers are no longer in one location. They're all sort of distributed around and sharing them. And then you have fully distributed, where there's actually no centralization at all. And this is the world that we're moving into with computers, with transactions. I come from the database world, and my entire career has really been involved with dealing with database servers. And all of a sudden, this is starting to shift a little bit in the last couple of years, where does that data really need to live in a database server? Or can I do something decentralized with it? Can I move that data off somewhere else? Is it really useful to have it in a centralized server? When I interviewed for my position at Inet, I remember telling my future boss, I don't really want to do databases anymore. He's like, yeah, but you're interviewing for a data architect job. You know, you have to do databases. I'm like, oh, God. But databases just, I've been doing them for so long, they just aren't that interesting to me anymore. What's really interesting to me is how can we distribute data around? And blockchain is really a great enabling technology for that. So, what does it mean to have applications being decentralized, or what you'll hear referred to as dApps? Terrible name. But there it is. They are programs or contracts, which we'll come back to in a second, that allow this collaboration on these peer-to-peer networks. So there's no middleman in the transaction. We're just, all the stuff I described earlier, we're actually functioning transactions, affecting transactions with each other. It's immutable, our magic spar book, right? You can't make changes to it. It's traceable. I can trace back how something got in there, how it happened. And very importantly for doing transactions on sort of the real world is that the same money can't be spent twice. That's a pretty important concept, right? If I'm selling you something digital and you're paying me something digital, it's pretty important not to be able to take that digital money and go buy something else with it also at the same time. And this magic Sparbook concept enables that. Your agreements can be multi-party, that is, we can have 3 or 4 people affecting together. And most importantly, what I described earlier is you own your own data. So if I'm doing a transaction with someone, I don't have to go through what is their Amazon ID. I don't have to go through, you know, what's your mother's maiden name and your social security number and all that stuff. We can relate to each other for the purposes of this transaction with just keys to identify ourselves. And so you own your own data, you own your own identity. It's a very different way of looking at data in the world. So what are some themes of decentralization? Well, as you know, governments and businesses thrive on centralization. That is central bureaucracy, centralization, and control. And in this, say, world of, well, the example that I was talking about earlier with someone was notary publics, where you're, what's the German word for notary? Quick. Yeah, that. Where you pay someone to be a notary for you, to say this document is official, right? In the world of blockchain, you wouldn't need to pay the government to do that. You could actually just do it with each other. Now, what does the government do with that money they take from you for that? This is not a political group, but... And this is my side note here, is that let's say we remove the ability of governments to tax transactions, to tax any sort of sale. What happens? There's no government, exactly. Now, the libertarians and the anarchists, they love all this, but the idea of social contracts, that is, who pays for roads, things like that, is a really important one as we start to develop these decentralization themes, is how do we fund our societies together? I don't have an answer to that. So remember, there are no experts, but it's something that I'm interested in talking about, and people are doing interesting research work on how we can do sort of like ethical blockchain work in that world. But remember, decentralization doesn't need a middleman. And I don't know if some of you remember a couple years ago, there was a Bitcoin-based network that was transacting what?